Welcome everybody. We are today in Kirksville in the Andrew Taylor Still University with Jason Haxton to talk about osteopathy. So first of all, I would like to thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. So first question, can you, Jason, please introduce yourself and explain us what is your job here in Kirksville?
Okay, I'm the director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine at A.T. Still University in Kirksville, Missouri. I've been doing this position since the year 2000, so 21 years starting this year. My job is actually to overall oversee all the areas of the museum, which would include the registrar, who basically takes in gifts and accepts and identifies and gives numbers. I work with the assistant director, my assistant, who actually takes care of the collection. She makes sure that it's cared for, that everything is properly identified, that it is in our software system so that it's available, and works towards accreditation, which is the highest standards of museum. We have an exhibit person. Again, we give feedback. We work with them to create exhibits to tell the stories of osteopathic healthcare. I work with the researcher also, and that person basically takes in questions, anything that she might not know, or share ideas where she might look at. We have an office manager who works with the tours, and so I also will give tours as needed. I work with education and giving historic information at both the state, national and international level, as well as what is needed at both our schools, because A.T. Still University is both in Kirksville, Missouri and Mesa, Arizona as one entity.
Okay, perfect. So obviously we will mainly talk about history and Dr. Still today. So would you be able to explain how and in which context Still created osteopathy in 1892?
Right. So the school occurred in 1892. His actual idea of what this new form of medicine was June 22nd, 1874. Prior to this, Dr. Still had tried to be a farmer, and because of bad weather conditions destroying the crops and his livestock, he then couldn't farm. So he moved to try to teach, as he had been well learned. His father made sure Abram was both a preacher, doctor, and well educated, made sure that plenty of books, plenty of tutoring happened. So A.T. Still was fairly confident as an educated man. But when he tried to teach with his wife, there was no money available. It was very cheap pay. And he says we could not survive off the salary of a teacher. So he then moves to medicine. And to do this, because he does not have a medical degree, but his older brothers do, he goes with his father to the Shawnee Reservation in Kansas, which at this time is just a territory. It is not a state. It is not politically part of the United States. It is just an area. He goes there. He helps to make sure that this becomes a state without slaves, and he is both treating the Shawnee Indian, learning medicine by apprenticeship from his father, who is a licensed MD and a reverend, a preacher of the Methodist faith. And so he's farming and working with the Shawnee Indians to learn medicine. At the point that his father believes he has learned enough, they can go to the courthouse, and legally he represents A.T. Still and says this person is now ready to be a doctor. You get a license that says that you are a surgeon and a physician and can practice medicine legally. So that is how he gets into medicine. However, he has the death of his wife and a newborn child. His other children drink bad water and die. He remarries, and his wife's first child, a boy, dies. The second child, also a little girl, dies. So he has lost his wife, most of his first children, and all of his new wife's children. She is a pharmacist, Mary Elvira, Still, and she also has been raised in a family of doctors. So she understands the challenges of being married to a doctor. As a matter of fact, she doesn't want to marry a doctor, but she does. But she understands what it's going to take. And so with her medical background and his medical, they look for a better form of medicine. They try everything. They try mind healing. They try water forms. They try all kinds of different things. And finally, Dr. Still settles on the idea that the body can be out of adjustment just as a machine can be out of adjustment. And little things become bigger things if you do not attempt them. So You work at the lowest level with your hands. He still says that there are things that need surgery, and maybe sometimes natural drugs or plants can help. So he's kind of building this new idea of healthcare based on bringing people better, closer to health, wherever you're at. Some people have horrible injuries or conditions. Cerebral palsy is a condition. At birth, a lack of oxygen, the nerves do not function correctly, and you may have a shake your entire life. Dr. Still says we cannot undo this, but as an osteopath, we can find ways to bring more comfort, to make them better able to function with that position. So all of osteopathy is now moving towards adjustment, diet, exercise, what you think, your mental health. And so this is the direction that he comes. Diet, exercise, mental health, and adjustment becomes the foundation. And people are getting better.
Mm-hmm.
He is very successful. And so many people are coming that he is not enough of him. He feels he needs to train people in this area. And so he starts a school in October of 1892. He accepts women, which is unusual because women are only to be at the home to have babies and take care of their husbands. No real work, job or career for women at this time in America. But his mother is a very smart, very strong woman. She can do anything. She can fix roofs. She can take care of the family while the father is gone. So A.T. Still says, of course we would let women come to my medical school and learn this new idea and help women, because I don't think women are getting good health care. Most women of this time, if they go see a male doctor, because all doctors are pretty much men, they decide to remove their uterus, give them a hysterectomy. It is believed that what makes women so strange is their monthly cycles and giving babies. So if you remove this, they're more like a man and they would be better. Well, of course, women don't want to go to the doctors. Mm-hmm. And so once Dr. Still starts introducing women physicians say, you don't need a hysterectomy. We can do other things to give you help. And women like this. So women start to trust medicine again. And there is this expansion in hospitals of patients. So the hospitals are saying, well, we're getting more and more women patients. If we have women doctors, we should have women doctors in all medical schools. And so bit by bit, it grows. So Dr. Still really influenced women in medicine, as well as a concept of health, that mm-hmm. everybody, wherever they're at, if they're 90 years old or 20 years old, you bring them closer to health. And so this is what osteopathic is. The school is a great success in October of 1892 and grows to today. There are 58 institutions of medicine in osteopathy and hundreds of schools throughout the world that do osteopathic healthcare. So many schools that of every 4 students that want to be a doctor, one of those will go to an osteopathic school. From one man 100 years ago to what we have today.
Crazy. So I know that recently you helped Raphael Zegara-Parodi, a French osteopath, to write an article about the influence of the Shawnees on Dr. Still. So my question is, do you know for how long Still stayed in direct contact with the Shawnees, and do you think that they actually influence his philosophy and way of thinking about osteopathy?
So yes, so Dr. Still's first patients are the Shawnee Indians. Unfortunately, because of the disease that these missionary and white settlers bring, the Shawnees start dying. And so it's not very long before they relocate away from the white settlers and move to Oklahoma. Okay. And so he maybe is around them a year and a half, but okay. long enough that he learns the language and is fairly fluent, according to sources, that he seems to be able to speak the language fairly good. And if you understand the Shawnee language, a few words can have bigger concepts. Often students say that when Dr. Still was given a problem of like, well, how does this work? How does the bladder work? How does this all go on? He would think about it. And when he was done meditating and thinking, he would start speaking in Shawnee. And the students were surprised. And then he would translate into English. So is he looking at a problem from a Shawnee perspective and then translating it to the English language. A very broad idea language to a more specific language.
That's crazy. Okay. I think that I know that still he built his school with the help of William Smith at the beginning. So a Scottish physician who is, by the way, the first graduated student in the school. Can you explain us who were the most important first osteopath after Andrew Taylor Still in the school?
Well, it would certainly be William Smith, who is an MD from the Royal School of Surgery in Edinburgh, Scotland, which is still one of the greatest schools today. We have evidence that William Smith attended that school for up to 7 years. He learned obstetrics. He learned all the most modern forms of medicine. So when he comes to America with his new wife, and he is living in St. Louis selling medical instruments. He's not practicing, but he's selling instruments, and he is a surgeon. So, he hears about miracles are occurring, and he decides that maybe I should go see what this is about because I can't believe them. And when he comes to Kirksville and asks, they say, well, yes, this is what Andrew Taylor Still does, but we don't know what he does. And this puzzles Smith because these are doctors and they've been treated by Dr. Still and they still don't know what he does. So he meets Dr. Still and says, look, I've been told I'm not to tell you I'm a doctor, but I am, and I'm curious about what you do. And they set an appointment to visit. Well, they talk, and William Smith says, well, we learned this, but A.T. Still says, but it's different than that. And after an evening and night of talking, Smith is so excited about this new idea that he has not learned about. He wants to learn it. So he relocates to Kirksville. He comes on as the first faculty and student. And so he is teaching anatomy and he is learning manipulation. And so when it comes time to graduation, he is the first graduate because we want the teacher to be a DO so that the students that learned from him, then it makes sense they learned from a DO. And so we do have the first diploma to a Scotsman. And he also was the first faculty besides A.T. Still. We bring in other faculty, which includes the Littlejohn family. John Martin Littlejohn comes to teach physiology and be a student. He later is the dean because he has been president of a school and understands registrars and classes and curriculum and how we recruit. These are things that need to be done that Dr. Still has no background on running an institution, and it's certainly more than a schoolhouse. As the school grows, Dr. Still has less of a role because it's hard for him to keep in contact with 600 students that are changing every year. And so he has a very small group that he stays with, and he is at one point no longer teaching, no longer doing OMM. He just does it if he wants to. So it's very rare that someone actually, even if they're at the school, has contact with Dr. Still. If he decides to talk, he talks. But otherwise, it is nothing scheduled, nothing ever planned. But the school continues to grow, and we bring other great people out. And that's the thing. Dr. Still always left space that osteopathy would grow. Each person would use their skill. Each person would make it better. But as he says, osteopathic healthcare, it's psychology, it's chemistry, it's biology, it's physiology. Everything about us being human has an element of osteopathic healthcare in it.
Okay, I was about to talk about this fact that Still was a teacher just for the first few years,
right?
And after he was just doing what he wanted to do, like a bit randomly in the school, and so sometimes he even interrupted the class, and right. He went. And so you told me the story about the cat. Yeah. Can you talk about it?
So because Dr. Still had no official role. We learned from Christine that he would go in very early. So he'd like to get up early at 7 a.m. and he would go to those classes. And again, he would just feel that he could interrupt. So if a teacher had a scheduled class and Dr. Still wanted to talk in it, he would just go in. And one of the situations that has been recorded multiple times is that in 1901, there was a class and one of the students said that Dr. Still came in and not only did he tell them how he developed osteopathic from experiences from childhood to now, but he also would do little lessons. And someone on one says, Dr. Still, you tell stories Why do you tell stories? Why don't you talk about it in technical or anatomical terms about anatomy? He goes, well, if I start talking about anatomy, people get tired and they fall asleep and they don't hear. But if I tell a story, they listen and then they remember the story, and I want them to do that. So that's why I tell stories. So one of these incidences was he comes into the classroom, he's got a cat, and he's petting the cat. And of course, everybody's like, oh my gosh, Dr. Still is here. This is quite exciting. And he speaks to the students, would you like to learn something today? Of course we want to learn something. We're here. And he says, okay, I'm going to teach you. And of course, the professor is on the board writing, and what is this disruption? Everybody's laughing. Nobody's paying attention to him. He's very embarrassed by this. Dr. Stowe doesn't care. He's petting the cat. And as he's petting the cat, he takes his hand, he grabs the tail, and he gives it a yank and pulls that tail hard. And the cat cries, whoa, and runs away. And of course, everybody in the classroom thinks it's funny. He just pulled the cat's tail and the cat ran away. And he goes, so what did we learn? And people said, did we learn something? What did we learn? And Dr. Still said, well, where was the noise? And it was the mouth. So what do? Do we sew the mouth up? Do we cut out the larynx so it cannot cry? Where was the problem? The other end, the tail. So when you pull the tail, that's the problem. Where the noise is, the mouth, is not the problem. So in osteopathy, when someone says the noise, the pain is in my shoulder, it may not be the shoulder. It may be lower in the pelvis or somewhere else. The noise is not where the problem is. And that's what he was teaching people very simply by demonstrating on the cat. And so again, but the faculty was very upset, and they go to his son because again, Dr. Stowe is not running the school. Charlie, his oldest son, and Harry, one of his twins, and Hildreth are running the school. And so basically they tell him that you can't be doing this. You cannot be interrupting the classroom. You cannot be going in there and causing problems, because then everybody's all laughing and now the professor cannot get the class going again and they're not learning, Dad. So you have to stop going. So Dr. Still stopped going into the classrooms because they complained.
That's a crazy story. Okay. I would say that in France, we mainly know three big osteopaths. So Andrew Still, obviously. William Gardner Sutherland, because he created the cranial field in osteopathy. And John Martin Littlejohn. Mm-hmm. And when we do research about Littlejohn, we can easily understand that he was such a strange, special character.
Right.
So, and we also know that after he left Kirksville, a conflict appeared between the Still and the Scottish. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us more about Littlejohn and this conflict?
So John Martin Littlejohn, as we look at these three people, we'll look at John Martin Littlejohn first. He had trained for philosophy and to be a religious preacher, a pastor, more like Dr. Still's father. He was not trained in medicine. His brother, that was younger, James, was trained to be a doctor and a surgeon, and a good one. But he trained to work with the congregation. There was some conflict that made that not happen. Some people said that there's some money issues. Some say that, some of the girls fell in love with him. I find that very unlikely. He's not a very attractive man, but whatever. But for whatever reason, he could no longer preach. So he only comes to America because he has a brother in America going to Columbian College, and he applies for a PhD, maybe in education. But he doesn't stay very long because he gets a job to be a principal, a provost, a president of a religious school. Well, that's his background. It makes perfect sense. He goes to this little school in Iowa, and he's working there for a while, and he's doing good work. They're actually financially in trouble, but he gets things going really well. But he has this problem of bleeding ulcers inside his throat. Mm-hmm. And that's supposedly why he comes to America, that the weather might be better than in England. And he sees Dr. Still, and he gets some relief. So Dr. Still and he meet, and he has some background in physiology. He's read some books and stuff. So they need somebody to teach physiology. So they hire him. So he's teaching physiology as faculty, but then decides he wants to be a student. So he starts to enroll as a student. So in the meantime, teaching physiology and a student, he eventually gets to be the dean. Remember, the school is growing and there's all these things that need to be done. Well, he's been a president. He certainly has the skill. So he basically becomes the dean. But what we believe was a final problem was that his brothers were MDs. One from the UK. The little brother, David, the youngest, got an MD degree from a school, not a very good school. It closed after a few years in Missouri, I think in the Joplin area. When it came time for graduation, John Martin Littlejohn proposes that he get an MD degree also. The DO school would give him an MDO, medical doctor osteopathy. Well, he's working with the other people and the students and the faculty, and he's getting a lot of support. And this comes up in a dialogue with the board of trustees, and they're not very happy with this idea of an MDO. It is Dr. Still's attitude. We don't want to be mixed with the MDs. They bleed, they poison, they do things we don't agree with. We do not want that. I had the chance for that degree. I did not want that degree, and I don't want it in my school. Well, that was the first conflict. That came around then too. They always had an argument with Hildreth, who was not a very well-educated man, and coming from England, they had high education. But to Dr. Still, it was the honest, truthful, simple man that he trusted, not the people with the big education. So there was a conflict of what they were going to teach, how they were going to teach. And in the end, the Littlejohns leave, John Martin, James, and David, and start their own school in the Chicago area, the Littlejohn Hospital and College. And it's very successful, and at some point it becomes so good after many years, maybe 10 years, other osteopaths that they met had moved to Chicago and wanted to buy the school and invest in it. McConnell and Proctor are living there, and they are the early students and early writers of books and faculty. So they have money, and they propose that we want to buy the Littlejohn College and hospital, but we don't want John Martin Littlejohn, because at this time, because of Flexner, America is looking at your credentials. And if a person with a preacher background is running a medical school, you could lose that school. So they want James to become the president so that it has a legitimate MD, a respectable MD as the president. He does this. And when they take over the school, James becomes vice president and McConnell is the president. There's some conflict, and that only lasts a year. So then Proctor becomes president. They promise to pay so much money for 3 years, every month. So John Martin's going to make a nice salary. Well, there's no role for him here. He claims his wife was sad and unhappy and wanted to go to England. Maybe she did. But he also had no role. He had no position at his school. So he goes back to England, buys a mansion, Badger Hall, and supposedly really doesn't do anything, doesn't work, doesn't do osteopathy for 3 years. Well, he doesn't need to. He's got money every month. But at the end of 3 years, we find out that he starts osteopathy in England.
The BSO?
The BSO. And from there, it basically grows under his direction. So that might be how we ended up with osteopathy in England, and there was a conflict as a result, because he didn't think James should have done what he did, but then there was some family conflicts as a result. Now, Sutherland is another situation. He comes from a very poor family up in the northern area, and dad doesn't have work, and dad has injuries, and so the children, very young, are actually providing the money and food. So William Sutherland is, as a young boy, having to work to make money, and as a result, he gets a job that's a very stable job to grow into being a printmaker. Publications, paper, newspapers, books, or articles, writing. It's a very good career in America. News is very important. And so he trains first as a young apprentice doing jobs and stuff, but pretty soon he gains the skill where he's putting the writing in these little pieces of metal. You have to take each letter, each right size, upside down and backwards. And so you have to be able to, with your fingers, touch and read, and be able to actually, almost like Braille, like a blind person, read backwards and upside down and know if there's something that's not the right size, to put the right size in. So his skills develop very great with his fingers. But then in America, we invent a machine that lets you type. It lets you type basically the information out, and we don't need this skill anymore. So this is when he starts looking for a new career. He hears about osteopathy. He's written about it. And they're very happy because this is a person who's educated, who knows how to write, and knows how to explain stories. And he tells a very favorable story of osteopathy against the MDs. So when he shows up in Kirksville with a friend who's going to become an osteopath and thinks this could be a new career move, he gets a scholarship because they want somebody who can advertise. Not a scientist gets a scholarship, but a person who can help advertise and promote. So what ends up happening is that Sutherland comes and learns basic osteopathy. But his sensitivity skills are so great, he is able to feel the differences that the average person wouldn't have from years of training of sensitivity. Plus, he's been fixing and working the machinery of printing, so he understands how things work. So not only does he feel it, but he also understands the function that machines mimic humans because we made them. So when you have a reaper that drops wheat from a harvester, it imitates the elbow. So everything we create is actually part of the body. If we have a pot-belly stove with furnace, it's our stomach. So he can look and feel the pieces of the printing machine in and puts those into concepts and knows how it works. So he comes up with this direction.
All right. Back in France, one of the typical questions asked to an osteopath is, what is the difference between an osteopath and a chiropractor? And I think it's a tough question to answer. So can we make a point on how chiropractic has been created with the influence of D.D. Palmer and Trotter or Stoddard?
So if we look at chiropractic, the founder is D.D. Palmer. His background is homeopathy, which is using plants, and magnetic healing, where I touch you and put my energy into you. Could be a little bit like osteopathy, but not really. It's more of giving you my energy and putting it into you. That is the basics of magnetic healing. Mesmer, I think he was a Frenchman. Mesmerizing. It's like when an animal looks at you like a big tiger in a cage, like, I'm going to eat you. Well, basically, mesmer is getting into you and then doing healing through vibration and energy. So that's his background, and plants and things. He has a friend named James Strothers, we believe, Strouther. However, Strothers has learned that if he removes the R, he becomes anonymous. It is a trick he learned from his father, who was avoiding, they're Canadians, and they're avoiding the mother. So they changed the name so she can't find them, and it works very well. So when he comes to the school, James Strothers is curious about osteopathy because he wants to make a living, and he takes out the R, he writes his name incorrectly, and he learns osteopathy that first year. He goes back to Davenport, where his friend D.D. Palmer is, and says, you've got to come see this. D.D. Palmer comes down, and D.D. Palmer takes lessons and eats with the family, meets the students. According to Blanche and Hildreth, A.T. Still's daughter and one of the first students of osteopathy, they said that they saw D.D. Palmer, and he came, and after a couple weeks, left. And then the next thing they hear is years later, he's come up with he's discovered, and it's like a joke, he's discovered chiropractic, which is really old osteopathy, the early stuff. And so we do believe this is true because when we actually look, chiropractic, the first school of D.D. Palmer, failed. He has maybe 6 or 10 students, and it takes him almost 6 years to train them. It's not like Dr. Still does it in 20 months. It's years. And it's not making money. There's not enough students. And his son is one of these students. And D.D. Palmer decides it's not going to work and sells everything to his son, B.J. Well, D.D. Palmer now leaves. He goes to Oklahoma. He's free of that school. And he's learned some technique. He's in Oklahoma City. He's doing some technique. And a medical doctor, Albert Gregory, sees him and goes, oh my gosh, what are you doing? He goes, well, this is something I created called chiropractic. Well, D.D. Palmer, who's an MD from Texas, says, well, let's make this into a school. So they start the school, the Palmer Gregory Chiropractic School, the second school. But within a few weeks, Albert Gregory says, you don't really understand what you're doing things, but you don't understand them. I don't think you understand anatomy. I don't think you know what you're doing. Who taught you this? And we believe that is when D.D. Palmer tells him that it was an osteopath named Struthers. And so using the R, which is the correct form, and so Albert Gregory writes that down in his book. The first book is that D.D. Palmer told me that he learned this from a guy, an osteopath named Struthers, which would be the same person that brought him the second year of the first school, that it was one of the early students. And so, sure enough, they have nothing to do with D.D. Palmer because they don't think he's very good. And he leaves. And so, but the school continues to function without him for 30 years. They don't need D.D. Palmer. So what is it that D.D. Palmer brought? Maybe not very much. D.D. Palmer establishes the Pacific School of Chiropractic and goes back to Davenport. Well, now his son, who has hired the osteopaths, graduates to be his faculty, but called them chiropractors, they're doing very well. They've got hundreds of students. They're making a lot of money. It's going very quick. D.D. Palmer comes back, and he's a hero because he had the first idea. They're going to have a parade. He's going to march in the parade, and his son says, no, Father, get in the car, we'll drive you. You're too fat, you're too big. And they start the parade. He gets out of the car and he starts marching. And he falls, and his son runs over him, and he's injured very badly. He leaves and goes back to California, and because of the injuries, he dies. And so it's believed that BJ killed his father, so much that D.D. Palmer's, BJ's mother and D.D. Palmer's wife sues the son for millions of dollars for killing the founder of chiropractic. Anyway.
That's a crazy story.
The bottom line is chiropractic comes out of osteopathy. And even D.D. Palmer said this, that I've tried it. And if you want to say it, chiropractic is osteopathy gone to seed, meaning that it's grown and thrown out its babies, and we're part of that.
That's crazy. I don't think a lot of French osteopaths know this story, so that's really cool. Thanks to your job, you have traveled all around the world and meet international osteopaths everywhere. We both know that there is a huge difference between how osteopaths work in France and the DOs here in USA. Back in France, a famous osteopath named Pierre Tricot, who translated all the 80 Steele's book in French, he said in one of his books that he thinks that Andrew Taylor Steele's osteopathic legacy is more present right now in Europe than in the US because of the medical orientation they took here. What do you think would be the opinion of Steele if he was still alive right now?
Well, Dr. Steele was alive when this was happening because in 1910, with the Flexner Report, it starts to move more medical. And as a result, Dr. Steele says the more medicine we put in, the less room there is for osteopathy. So he made it very clear that he was not happy. But it was believed that politically, if we did not do that, osteopathy would have vanished altogether. So it was kind of like maybe we will give some things away because we have to. But all the way up through the 1930s, most of the osteopathic physicians believed that they were still being true. But they said it was after the 1930s there was really a very sharp decline, and it was more medical education and less osteopathic philosophy. And so, A.T. Steele did say before he died, as he saw these changes, that the hope for osteopathy was an international school that would stay true to the principles. And again, the principle is a philosophy of health, moving people closer to health, diet, exercise, mental health, and manipulation. And that is a foundation, because if the structure is not correct, that can create symptoms of illness. However, so if someone comes to you that ill, you should check the structure first, because if it's structure, you fix the structure. However, if I look and everything seems to be right, and yet you are still sick, then we need the physician to look at disease. Maybe it's a bacteria, maybe it's a virus, maybe it's a cancer. These are things osteopaths cannot treat. They can help you with health, which will fight them, but you would need a physician. So Our physicians have the manipulation skills of osteopathy, but then they have the higher training to do both. And so I would see a place for osteopaths because anybody can look at structure, and that should be the first step. And if it isn't structure, then you go to the next step of a physician. In our case, they can do both steps.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. Okay. So actually, the next question has been sent from one of my former teacher in France. He wanted to know, back in the days, the first osteopath used to treat all kind of diseases like dysentery.
Mm-hmm. Dysentery, which is, cholera and diarrhea.
Yeah. And while nowadays, osteopathy is mainly used to treat musculoskeletal pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so
lower back pain, neck pain.
Yeah. And his question is, do you think that it's a mistake and that we should fight to show that osteopathy is more powerful than just this and what we can call a wellness therapy? Do you think that we should fight this?
So this is what's interesting is because the higher skilled osteopath who really understands the nerves, the body stuff, realizes that the splenic nerves, that your body responds to things. We get fever to fight disease. We get diarrhea to clear ourselves of material. These are not diseases. These are actually your body functioning. And normally the body heals very well. Mm-hmm. But Dr. Still says sometimes it makes a mistake. And we need to be able to override it. So fever is good, but if a fever never stops and gets too high, it can kill the body. And so by understanding where the nerves and things are, you could actually control the fever. The same with diarrhea. Diarrhea is fine. But if the point that you're having so much diarrhea that you're dehydrating, that it's going to put the body in shock, you need to be able to stop the diarrhea. Dr. Still could orchestrate the whole body. His knowledge of nerves, muscles, and centers was so great that he could turn on a fever, turn off a fever, turn on diarrhea, turn off. So it was like a conductor of the body when it made mistakes. To prove the body can make a mistake, we'll use a story that we hear of Dr. Still. There was a young boy and he was cutting barrels. He takes the knife and accidentally cuts his knee. Mm-hmm. He's a young boy. He basically, a few days later, it becomes infected. It swells up. It starts to become, red. And the mother is very concerned because the doctors are saying, well, if this continues, we must cut off the leg to save him because of blood poisoning. Well, she says, I want to see Dr. Still. Well, Dr. Still is not in the town. And she's panicked, but and they're saying, well, it's getting worse and worse. And she we need to take the leg or we're going to kill, your son will die. Mm-hmm. So it's either the leg or it's his whole life. And she was like, but he's so young, to lose his leg would be so horrible. I just wish we could have Dr. Still here. And lo and behold, it's late at night. He goes straight to the house as if he knows. It's Dr. Still. Oh, thank goodness you're here. Look at the, and of course, Dr. Still walks over to the boy and he examines it. He looks around and he goes over to a chair and kicks up his feet and he puts his hat down. And the mother is like, oh my gosh, we're waiting for him and he's gone to sleep. I don't understand. Dr. Still is like that for 45 minutes. Suddenly he snaps up. He goes over to the student's leg, the child's leg. He makes an adjustment. He says, I think that should work. I'll be back in the morning. What happened? What Dr. Still was actually doing wasn't sleeping. He was in his mind going through all the issues of anatomy and what would work best for this problem. And he came to the conclusion that the swelling had cut off the natural blood flow, which was keeping the blood from taking out the infection and healing. So because there was then we were getting an infection that was growing. And so what he had done was he made an adjustment to reduce the swelling. Once the swelling reduced, the blood started flowing. It started to clean out the area. And by morning, it was already better. And within a few days, everything was fine. So this gives you an idea. The body was doing what it could do for defense, but it was going to kill you. So this is what Dr. Still would say. The body can make mistakes, and we have the power to correct it.
To fix it. Okay. So we spend now more than 2 days together, and we talked a lot, and you explained me a lot of time that you think people associate osteopathy with just OMM.
Correct.
And you think that it's much more than this, as you said already, body, mind, and spirit. I agree with you on this point, and still probably understood that when he moved to Macon to work on the sanatorium with Hildred. So can you talk a bit about this?
So what people don't realize is that patients would come and be here for a month, 2-3 months. Now, some of the patients got upset with Dr. Still because they said, well, that person came here and they left the next day. And Dr. Still was like, well, so what's your problem? It's like, well, I'm still here. Dr. Still said, well, when you came, what was your weight? I mean, I was lost a lot of weight. I wasn't eating well. I was okay. So have you gained some weight? Yeah. When you came here, were you sleeping? No, I wasn't sleeping. Are you sleeping through the night? Yeah. So you're getting better? Yeah. What are you complaining about? Your case is not that person's case. Your case took years to get you where you're at. This person swung an axe, pulled a rib out of place. I put it back. His case was only 5 minutes. Yours is a lifetime. And so Dr. Still would often work with the diet and not even do a manipulation for up to a month. Why? You're not healthy enough. If I make the adjustment, it does no good because there's no health. And so we have to get the body healthy enough to accept the thing. So I know of cases where Dr. Still says he wouldn't even touch the person for up to a month. But at the point they thought they were healthy, he would then do the manipulation and it would be successful. So again, it is interesting. How long does it take? It depends on the person. And that's the thing is it may be one treatment or it may be dozens and take years. Each person, how long did it take? Is this a lifelong condition or is it just something you did? And that determines how quickly you're healed.
That's cool. So that's the point why they created this center in Macon?
So Macon was to treat people that had mental illness, and some of it was very new, but some of it was very long. And so they would look at diet, they would look at your exercise, they look at your socialization, they would look at your hobbies, the food you were eating. Sometimes people got crazy because they were actually interacting with chemicals. As today, they were putting their hands in things, it leached to their brain, heavy metals, mercury, arsenic, cyanide, and they would go crazy. By putting them on a fat, cheese, milk diet, the brain would actually release that heavy metal and they would become back. So everybody was treated very differently. But one of the things is they always received was manipulation. And he said, for one odd reason, rib number 9, in mental illness, if the 9th rib is not in the right place, it tends to lead towards some kind of more mental problems than others.
That's awesome. Okay. An easier topic now. Can you just explain us how this school works? How long the ATSU school, for how long the students have to study here, and what are their possibilities after graduating? What kind of job they can do?
So a medical education is a general education. They all initially get the same education, the same foundation.
For 2 years?
For 2 years. And then they have the opportunity to try out and see, what does a family physician do, a general practice? What does a surgeon do? What does obstetrics do? What does gynecology do? What does pediatrics do? You get to work with doctors over the next 2 years. And as we were told, you continue to do manipulation. One of the problems was some of the sites would not do any manipulation because you'd be with MDs. Because MDs and DOs work perfectly together. Our students don't just go with osteopaths or osteopathic physicians. They're with medical doctors who've never done OMM or DOs that have not used it, so they don't introduce it during those 2 years rotation. We are now making sure that they get that continued work so they can use it. We heard yesterday from Dr. Billy Street. And so the idea would be that at the end of 4 years, you're just a general doctor. You can now specialize in OMM, manipulation, in pediatrics, obstetrics, surgery. Each would then, you go with that group, you practice with them, you work with them every day, and at the end of 2 to 4 years, You are now done, and you take their test for pediatrics, obstetrics, surgery. You pass that board, that test, you are now licensed to be an independent surgeon or whatever. And so this is how we get the variety. But all of them have education in OMM. And even if they're maybe in surgery and don't use it, they understand the body and could work with it. We are actually told that in surgery, after you're in surgery, your body actually goes into hibernation. It goes quiet. And until you start digesting and gurgling, you can't leave the hospital. By just doing some raising of the ribs, very lightly, after surgery, it starts to tell the body, it's okay, it's safe. You can go back to healing. You heal quicker with a little bit of OMM after surgery, and you get out of the hospital quicker because the body starts responding. So even surgeons have told us, OMM is very good. We need to convince everybody to continue to use OMM in every visit. There is no case where any patient couldn't use a little adjustment, and you should do it every time, a little bit, with every patient.
That's awesome. And do you know if the students here have some classes about the historical part of osteopathy and the philosophy of osteopathy?
When they come in the first week, they get some of the history from some of the faculty that I help supervise. And then there is a club that all students can be part of that tells the history and things that we're doing today.
Okay. And do you think it's important, even in France or England and everywhere, that we have some knowledge and that we are familiar with the history of osteopathy?
I think it is, because the history helps remind you of why we do this profession, where it's come from, and actually how it's going to continue to grow. Unfortunately, the United States is very young, a couple hundred years, where Europe has thousands of years of buildings and histories and wars. And so the appreciation of history is, I think, greater in many countries with long civilizations, where the United States is fairly new, as is Australia. We tend to not appreciate history because we haven't lived long enough to understand it. So I do feel that it is a better, we get more respect from people that have used and understand history better.
Okay. One of the last questions. So I think we are both really interested by the osteopathic books. In your opinion, what would be the 2 or 3 really good books about osteopathy, philosophy, and historical part?
If we're looking at Dr. Still, he would write a book, and then I'm done with that. He doesn't write new editions. He doesn't keep it going. Where some people, this is first, second, third edition. He said, I write what I know, and then I'm done. And if I have a new idea, I will write another book. So you could not really say that any book would be, if you were looking at Dr. Still, you would look at his last book. And he says this, my final book, 1910, Research and Practice of Osteopathy. That is what I know. And if there's anything in osteopathy, it is there. There is more philosophy. There are more techniques. There are more terms of treatment. So if you really would only read one book of Dr. Still's, you should read his last book. And it sounds research, it sounds like it's really technical. And no, a layperson. It talks about the philosophy of why we're here as a spirit. There's there's stories. He tells stories about waste. You want to see a city fall apart? Take away the garbage collection and the sewage and see how quickly that city destroys. The same is true as a human. If the waste is not removed, you're in trouble. And so he uses stories like this to help us understand how we are, or how we're born, and this is a perfect body, but the spirit doesn't know anything, that we are now in this world, and the placenta builds a body, but existence is a placenta for the spirit, and we are now, you and I, in a placenta, growing our spirit until we die.
That's crazy. There is just a very last question I would like to ask you, which could make a good conclusion. So I think that people, if they read just a bit of Still, they can easily think that Still was a really religious person, and I don't think that it's really true. So can you explain us the opinion of Still about religion, and even maybe the definition he gave?
So a lot of people say, well, Dr. Still, your father was a Methodist preacher. So are you Methodist? Are you Christian? Is that your belief? Dr. Still actually identified religions by their leaders. So he would not talk about Catholic. He would say the Pope's religion, or Muslim, Muhammad's religion, or Mormonism, Brigham Young's religion. He identified them by their leadership because he felt that actually it was driven by people, not by what he considered a general philosophy. He goes, organized religion, I'll have none of it until the religion says every person has a spirit. And this is so Dr. Stills got asked, well, are you Shawnee? Are you Methodist? What are you? He writes it down. He says, A.T. Still's religion is love everyone, justice for all. If we love every person, black, brown, Asian, man, woman, gay, transition, whatever, love every person. They're a spirit on a journey. He says we don't touch the body as an osteopath till you understand inside is the spirit. It's about the spirit, not the body. We work with the body, and that's like a car, but the person, treating the person well, that is what it is about. And for that reason, I don't believe in abortion. It is a spirit on a journey, and you've stopped it. You have no right to stop a journey of a spirit, however tough that spirit is, and that journey will be, the spirit will come out okay. So you have no right to stop its journey. And so, as he said, this spirit is what is in each of us. And so if we love every person and everybody gets fairness, at birth, children understand kindness and cruelness. They understand empathy. They understand fairness. That kid gets one cookie, this guy gets two. Why? Children understand these things of Dr. Still's religion. And if you do good, good things happen. If you do bad, bad things happen. Love everybody, justice, covers what we know as children, and I think it is a good religion. It means we accept everyone, old, young, whatever color, whatever their condition, rich, poor, love everyone. It's a spirit on a journey of learning, and we should all be learning.
I think that's a perfect conclusion.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm so grateful for those days, for this interview.
Well, you've been very fun. One thing I do want to add is that you mentioned is, do Americans appreciate their osteopathic history? Well, for the first time, there are 58 universities, and the Center for all the colleges and the Center for the profession are going to talk to every student coming into the profession. Thousands of students all at once on a Zoom. And they have made a space for history to be part of that for a half hour, that I will get to talk to every new student of osteopathy in the United States. It's awesome. Never happened. So maybe we are appreciating our history better. But thank you.
Thank you so much.